Welcome to the Teach First Interview Skills Workshop. This is being delivered by the Pathways Career Services team within Teach First. And my name is Rachel Taylor. I'm one of the senior officers in the team. The Pathways Career Services team provides career support, advice and guidance to ambassadors and second year participants. We do this through CV, interview skills, application and cover letter support, as well as providing summer projects, career coaching, resources, and also supporting people with CPD opportunities. So we have started these workshops to help support people with interviews. We're aware that interviews can be very challenging and can be quite intimidating. So what we'd like to go through in this session with you is around interview basics, so how to prepare for an interview and tips for interviews, going through the STAR method, so how to answer interview questions in a particular structure, how to handle difficult questions, verbal and non-verbal communication, and some tips for building your confidence within interviews. So firstly, preparation. It sounds like a given, but it's such an important part of the interview. And there's some areas that we'd really like to highlight to you. Firstly, around asking for more information about the format of the interview. This really helps you to be able to prepare specifically for that format and feel more confident of what's going to be expected on the day. And then visit the school as well if you're applying for a teaching role. Organisations and schools, especially for those head teacher and senior leader positions, really expect people to ask for a visit. And it doesn't reflect as well if you don't take that time to ask for a visit and request it. So knowing your own CV and your career history, this is what a lot of the interviewers are going to have in front of them for the interview. So ensuring that you know what examples you've used and what skills and experience you've pulled on for this will be key. Also ensuring you prepare before examining the role description and creating examples of questions. So we'll go through a little bit more detail around how to do that, but really pulling that role description apart and thinking about exactly what skills they're looking for, exactly what that person's specification is asking for, and so what you need to demonstrate within interview. So knowing the employer. A really key part of an interview process is ensuring that you have researched the organisation before and researched the school before. So thinking about what current challenges they are facing, what their previous experience has been. Are they international? Are they national? What size organisation? What size school are they? Can you see any information in regards to their previous Ofsted inspections, in regards to their previous performance? And is there any information that you can gain in regards to what their next steps are and what their strategy is moving forward? Having your questions ready at interview and ensuring you do prepare questions, and then also knowing why you want to work there. It's very common through interview for people to perform very well and provide excellent examples, but when that employer is asking why you specifically want to work for them and what's really driving you to work there, and people don't have an answer, it really does allow their interview to just kind of step back and for them not to make that same impression as they're looking for. So just around a few more practical tips with preparation, thinking about outfit, dressing professionally at all times, thinking about the interviewer names, ensuring that you know them and you've made a note of them, allowing plenty of time to get to the interview, bringing a copy of your CV, as well as reminders and a list of questions. And I really wanted to pull two things out of those practical tips as well. Firstly, in regards to the interviewers, looking and seeing if you can research the interviewers before you go. It really is very impressive if people will be able to understand who does what in that interview panel, what their connection is with the organisation. And it also makes it quite clear when those people are asking specific questions, what they're looking for too. And then finally, reminders. A lot of people think it will reflect badly on them if they take a list of reminders into an interview with them, which is not the case at all. It can make a big difference to your confidence, knowing that you have just a few bullet points of kind of key examples that you have, key successes that you've managed to achieve. I wouldn't recommend having them as whole paragraphs written out, just bullet points to remind you, because otherwise the danger is sitting there and looking at your paper and reading rather than looking up and engaging with eye contact with the interviewers. And that list of questions, just finally thinking around what the plans are for the school, for the organisation. How does this role fit in to that school, and what are they expecting for this person? What challenges might this role face? Are always a few interesting questions to ask as well. So what I'd like you to do now is just take a few minutes, just thinking around the role description that you've brought with you today, just highlighting the key words, the key phrases through the job description, noting down 1 or 2 examples from each criteria or each competency that may be on that person's specification or description, and then just writing in some detail of either what you think they're looking for, what that actual task means, and what skills they'd be looking for you to perform well in the task, or examples of a time where you have performed that previously. So I'm just going to skip on to the next slide, which is an example of a job description. So here you can see that this person has pulled out either previous experience that they've got, or they've taken some time and just thought about what they're really asking for. So I recommend pausing the webinar, just having a look over that for the next 3 to 4 minutes, or as long as you'd like, and then just returning to us when you've had a chance to make some notes. So competency-based questions are a very common form of question for interviews. There are definitely a lot of benefits to them. They focus specifically on the advertised competencies, on that job description, and also on the organisation's values. So it allows you to prepare examples that are very, very fitting for that particular job you're going for, and also allows you to expect certain examples, certain questions to arise, so nothing's going to take you by surprise. So it also allows all candidates to be assessed against the same criteria rather than being assessed against each other, which is really, really important and makes it a completely unbiased and a very, very fair method. So some common competencies include communication, teamwork, integrity, leadership, planning and organising, and flexibility. And the best way to structure a competency-based interview answer is using the STAR method. So pulling out 3 different things. Firstly, when you're answering the question, providing, putting into context the situation that you were doing, situation you were put in, or the task that you were completing. Then what actions you took through that. So thinking about what you specifically took, not what a team took, but what you did, what went well, what stood out. And then lastly, thinking about the results. So a really, really, and I think the most important part of the answer is the result. That interviewer is looking to see what successful actions you took and what the outcome was. Being able to reflect this in any statistics, any data, I really recommend it, really strengthens it. And also, if you have a really strong example of a very interesting task that you undertook, and that although the outcome was not positive, that is still fine to use. The only thing that is really necessary to include is afterwards what you would do differently next time and what learning you took from it as well. So what I recommend now is just looking at that job description you had, thinking about those values or competencies that you pulled out, and preparing an answer. So jotting it down in bullet points firstly in that STAR structure, and then practicing it. And this is a really key part of the whole interview process, is the more that you practice, the more prepared you'll feel, the calmer you will feel, and the more composed you will feel on the day. So I recommend pausing the webinar for as long as you like and just thinking about having a bit of practice. As I mentioned, using that STAR method, so describing that situation or task, the actions that you took, and what the result was. So we have below just a few examples for you to look through about answers people have given. So I'm just going to leave the slide up for a few more seconds, and the same for the next one, just so you have a chance to see them. move on now to how to handle difficult questions. So I think everybody has been in an interview situation where there's been one or two questions that have been asked and you completely blank and can't think of a good quality answer, and it's really, really frustrating. So there's just a few pointers here of this, and firstly to think about the fact that they're there to challenge you. The interviewer does expect them to ask a question or two to you and that you to real struggle to provide a fantastic answer. So don't worry if it's not coming out as a completely smooth answer. And if you need to take a few minutes to take a breath and to get your brain in order and think about as good an example as you can do. Often questions can be quite long, so it may be hard at the end of a question to think around what the start was and how that ties in with it. So do ask to have the question repeated if you need to, or ask them to clarify what they'd like you to answer. Think about the role. How does this question tie in with the role? It can actually give you a bit of an idea of what sort of an example they're looking for if you think about the role responsibilities and the question they have asked, and then be able to pull an example in line with that. Something very important through the whole of the interview process is to not provide a negative answer. So ensuring that you're always answering something, and if it's been a learning for you, then do be honest, say that it was a learning and what the positive was out of it and what next time you would do or what you found challenging. But I would definitely steer away from sides where you may say, my manager never let me do that, me and my manager didn't get on, they didn't like me. It really portrays kind of very negative picture, and it has some red flags for interviewers if that is the way that you portray your previous experience. So thinking about linking this difficult question to an achievement, being able to provide an example of a success that you've had, even if it's not exactly the same as what they may be asking for, but you may be able to say that although you have had some experience in that, something that's been very relevant and very much of an achievement that you'd like to talk about was, and then describe that in more detail. And if you do feel that the question is a completely stumping you, you're not sure how to go about it, then I'd really recommend just asking if you can revisit it later on in the interview, which is again completely fine, will not reflect badly on you. So we have here a chart of how to sell your experience and putting into context teaching experience, and then thinking about what does that look like as a skill set that you have gained. So I'm just going to run through them. So firstly, delivering a lesson, planning and organising, having new tasks given to be delivered in a set time, managing multiple priorities to conflicting deadlines, working with parents, with colleagues, managers and governors, is managing stakeholder relationships with diverse groups, tracking pupil data is monitoring and evaluation, analysing pupil data is research and analytical skills, organising a school trip is event organisation, lesson observations shows you the ability to work under pressure, planning new lessons is being creative, being innovative, facilitating learning and development is project management, supporting newly qualified teachers is staff development, delivering lessons is presenting, changing lesson plans with short notice is being adaptable, is being flexible, working in a challenging school is demonstrating resilience, and convincing a pupil to engage with the task is influencing, and finally, working with a colleague on a task is being collaborative. So hopefully you've been able to take a note of a few of those that may really stand out, or all of them if you'd like, but I'm just going to leave that slide up for a few more seconds in case you'd like to add some in. So the next area that I wanted to look at was around confidence and communication. So firstly, with confidence, I think that something to remind yourself before you're going into that interview is the fact you've been selected for interview because that person has assessed your CV or your application form, and they can see that you have the ability to perform in that role and the potential to match that role criteria and the skills required, or you're already at a level where you can step into it and meet the person's specification immediately. On your side, if you've looked through that person's specification and you've provided examples in your practices beforehand, you know you have the ability to do your role. So something I really recommend doing before going into an interview is taking a deep breath, reminding yourself of that, picturing somebody that you know that is extremely confident, and then thinking about how you can mirror that with your own body language, and then taking that step into the room. So doing your research before really makes a difference for that day. Locating sample questions and practicing helps so much. And the more clear you are in your mind, the more clear it will be in your answers and more concise you will be. Listening is an extremely important part of the interview. There is often cases where people interrupt interviewers and talk over them whilst they're trying to answer questions, which can be very frustrating for an interviewer. And it's also a really great opportunity to demonstrate active listening as well, and to show that you have gone through and the information they may have fed you at the beginning of the interview, letting you know maybe any changes that are happening in that school at that time or that organisation at that time, and then being able at the end to feed into that and ask a question about that really shows that interactive listening skill. And having no skeletons. If you stated something on your application form and for some reason on your LinkedIn profile it says something different, just make sure that doesn't happen, because they're asking that question to you at interview. They're going to be expecting all the information to be consistent across everything. Around communication, thinking about your body language. I mentioned just then about taking that deep breath before you go in, really calming yourself, being very open. Do not sit there with your arms crossed, your legs crossed, and giving more of a closed off negative view. Be very clear and concise the way you talk. Ensure that you're giving a firm, confident handshake when you first meet the panel. Always look on the bright side of life. Again, that positive feedback when you're explaining your examples and explaining your previous skills. No jargon, not using teaching jargon, even if you're going for another teaching role and some of the panel are teachers and you know them, it doesn't matter. There will be potentially governors on there that have not had teaching experience, and it's really hard for someone to measure how you're going to demonstrate and do well in this role if you're using jargon they don't understand. So thinking about also if your answers are matching your presentation. So if you're talking in a very quiet, very understated manner, you're ensuring that your body language is slightly more understated, but when people are asking you to describe yourself and describe your personality, you describe it as the most outgoing, the most extrovert person that they're ever going to meet, then it can make in interviewers' minds a little bit of uncertainty because there's something that's not quite matching there. And again, it just throws up a few red flags for them. So job interview must-dos. So these are things that we can say, do's and don'ts, that we've noticed over the last few years. And firstly, it's around quality, not quantity of experience. I'm aware when people are taking a step to the next level of seniority within an organisation or a role, they can sometimes worry that they haven't had 20 years of experience doing it, and that's going to affect their application. Like I said, if you're going through to that interview stage, you've demonstrated you're going to have the potential to perform in that role. Think about quality examples, not quantity of examples, and think about quality experience that you can talk about. A lot of the interviews with panels is about convincing the majority that they can see you in the role. And I think a technique for that can help is around you envisioning yourself in that role and performing in the position. And then that will really help people come around to that way of thinking as well. Don't talk yourself out of a job. It's very hard sometimes in an interview to sit there with silence after you've answered a question, but it's even worse to sit there and waffle and talk on, and the interviewers really actually lose the impact of your answer. They don't remember what was strong about your answer and the strong about your examples. So make sure, stick to the STAR structure, say what the result is, then stop. You'll often be able to gauge from the interviewers if they would like to move on and have quite a lot of questions they'd like to go through more quickly, or if they really probe you on every single answer of how much information you need to give out. So don't talk about changing everything with new ideas. It's something that is does happen quite commonly, and people go into an interview and they say they've looked at their website and they'd like to change this, and they've got a brand new idea for the department and they'd like to change this, they'd like to change almost everything that they mention. They have a big change, a big plan for. Think about it in the fact that that school or that organization, they don't want to sit there for an hour or however long the interview might be and hear about what's wrong with their school. Yes, they want someone creative, they want someone innovative, but just be wary when you are answering questions about what you would change, that you wouldn't change everything. And also make sure you're maybe feeding it into, if you change something that you think would also feed into their strategy, so they can make sure that you're thinking about kind of that whole school vision and working in line with it. So focusing on what you can do for the organisation rather than what they can do for you. Again, a really common one that people do go into interviews. They say, I'd like this because it's the career I really want to go down. This is a really good stepping stone for me to go into something else. Or it's really good, I really want to gain management skills. I'd like to manage a team. I haven't had management skills before. It's what I'm applying for. So just thinking about what can you do for them, not just what can they do for you. Wouldn't recommend bringing up salary or benefits during the first interview. And a final point is really in interviews to be yourself. The more genuine you are and the more you are yourself, the more that interview panel can see what you're like as a person and can see how you would fit into their organization and into their culture. There are times where people do go for interviews and they have got the skill sets for the role and they have got the experience, but they're not selected. And sometimes the reason for that can be that match of the environment and the culture matching you and what your personal views are and what your ethos is. So I would also recommend researching that before and applying for roles that are really in line with yourself, and then making sure that you're demonstrating that drive in interview. And like I said, being yourself, being genuine really does pay off. So thank you very much for watching our webinar. We hope that you found it very, very useful. If you would like any more information or any more support, then do not hesitate to contact the Ambassadors inbox. And good luck with your interviews.